Okay, we'd like to welcome today to PrescottJROTC Colonel Jim Kula, a retired 06 Air Force colonel who had the experience of being a shot down prisoner of war in Vietnam. He's going to relate to you some of the experiences today. We'd like to welcome you. Another round of applause, please.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to spend some time with you. As I look at you, you're a little older than my grandson. So it kind of puts into perspective the timeline, as Colonel Peebles said. It's been a while back. I was born in 1947 in Manchester, New Hampshire. I spent the next 18 years there. I got a little rise from that. You from there?
I'm from Amherst, New Hampshire,
Yeah.
sir. I have family up in Bedford and Manchester myself.
In fact, I'm going up in a couple of weeks to see my brother, still lives in Manchester. Went to Manchester Central High School, and they didn't have junior ROTC at that time, but I knew that I wanted to fly airplanes. I used to watch out of the Air National Guard base, the C-119 flying boxcars fly over my house. It was in the landing pattern. And I said, I wonder how you get to do that. And so I joined what's called the Civil Air Patrol. And I did that for 4 years while I was in high school. And then through that, I heard that, you know what, if you want to fly in the Air Force and be an officer, then you need to go to the Air Force Academy. Well, I hadn't really heard about that place, but I started looking into it. In my freshman year in high school, I started applying. So you freshmen, it's not too early to start putting feelers out on what you think you might want to do. The worst that would happen is you're not selected. The best that would happen is you are selected. And if you are, you can always say no. But if you never apply, you can never be accepted. For whatever, be it scholarship, the college you want to go to, or service academy. So for 4 years, I took the test, I went and did the medical, I took the physical fitness test. And my senior year when I did all that, because I knew now it counted, I did okay, and I got appointed to the Air Force Academy. And in 1969, I took my first airplane ride on an airliner from Boston to Denver, where I went to go to the Air Force Academy. Spent 4 years there, majored in civil engineering, and then graduated, got commissioned, and went off to pilot training. And I did a year at Laredo Air Force Base down in Texas, where I learned to fly, the basics of flying. And then in my class, like in most things, the next step was based on your rank or standing in the class and how well you did. And I was, I think, 4th in the class, and there were 4 F4s, and I wanted a fighter. And so I got the 4th F4, and I went to training at George Air Force Base in Victorville, California. And that's where I met my wife, Jane, back in December of 1970. They had a program where they'd bus the young women up to the bases, and they got to meet us. You know, we got to meet them. And I met Jane, and we had a few dates. One of the first things I did was have Jane show me her ID card, because I wanted to be sure she was 18. And she was. She had just turned 18 last May. So we dated. I graduated from that course and got moved over to North Carolina, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina. There a few weeks and said, this is boring. So I called Jane up and said, come on out and we'll get married next summer, which we did. We got married in July of 1971. Spent my year there and then got orders to go to Vietnam, because this was all while the Vietnam conflict was ongoing. And I went over to Da Nang Air Base in South Vietnam and left Jane in Southern California where her parents were living. So she was able to have them as support. And off I went through a number of training opportunities at the Civil Air Patrol, the Academy, survival school on my way to Vietnam. And the point I want you to get out, one of the points I'd like you to get out of this is how important training is. Because you never know when you're going to fall back and have to rely on that training you got. Be it education or hands-on training or whatever. Just experiences you have as you're growing up and maturing. Because those are the things that you're going to fall back on and have in your gut when you're all alone and you have to face something that's tough. And that's how you get through it. You reach in your gut, you fall back on what you're made of, And that's what has you meet these challenges. So after 3 months of being in Southeast Asia, I had now moved over to Tak Lee Air Base in Thailand. On the 29th of July, 1972, I took off on a mission with 100 other fighters, lots of support airplanes, 8 tankers where we air refueled, and we were going on a mission in the northeast part of North Vietnam, about 70 miles northeast of Hanoi, up near the Chinese border. My call sign was Trigger 4, and that means I'm the number 4 man of a flight of 4 F-4s called Trigger. We have other flights, date and palm flights, which are dropping chaff, and that's aluminum foil that they drop in the air so the radars can't see targets. There's a number of other flights that are firing Shrike missiles, which are missiles that home in on the radars. So you can see that it's a big, game, if you want to call it that. It's not a video game, it was real, where we're trying to do something and the enemy is trying to stop us from doing that as we go along. On that day, and I'll show you a film clip here in a little bit, on that mission, a missile hit my airplane, blew the tail off of it, and I caught on fire, and the airplane was falling out of the sky, so I had to talk to my backseater, Mel Matsui, and say that I can't fly the airplane, and we have to eject, and we ejected. Yes, sir?
Just out of curiosity, was the missile that hit you a SAM or was it shot from a MiG?
It was an air-to-air missile. When you see the film I'm going to show you, you can see things are very complicated. The official report says that it was an ATOL missile off of a MiG-21. Although there are also AIM-7s being fired, which were friendly missiles at airplanes throughout. So in the fog of war, and you've heard about incidences where they have to investigate, and that's what this is. This is a result of the investigation to try to get to the bottom line on what it was. But it was an air-to-air missile. Now you'll hear, as we're ingressing over North Vietnam, where the flights are maneuvering for surface-to-air missiles that are being shot at us, and we're trying to evade those. Those were mainly SA-2 missiles that were being shot. Okay, so you could bring up the screen. What I'm going to do is play you an audio tape that was on a little cassette recorder in the pocket of my flight lead, Trigger 1. He had that recording as we were going along. The good news is that recording was able to be given to Jane after I was shot down, so she knew that I was okay on the ground because the flight had talked to me. Okay. So this is an audio tape, if you just want to listen through it.
Strikes going. Big strikes being fired.
The strikes are those missiles going to the radars.
Roll back down with me, man.
The flights are maneuvering to evade the missiles that are being fired. And that missile, when they pulled up, didn't guide and exploded away from the flight.
Yeah, I got it. Got a missile coming at it? Yeah. Watch the birds on the right. Got it out.
As this mission gets more exciting, you'll hear some language in there, and that's just human nature, I guess. You revert back to your basic instincts.
We're going over there.
I'm sure it's nothing you haven't heard, but I have to apologize for it. That's my Trigger 3 turning to the right because MiGs are starting to attack the flight.
Okay, 1 and 4 start to fire.
Okay, I got somebody.
Okay, we got a thing up there 12 bucks. They still in it.
Okay, the way on the right front, I can't see them going through. Okay, keep the 3 and 4 on. I got no reason to fly. They're out of job.
One of the other F4s just shot down a MiG.
Okay, I got the 3 or 4 mine that are 7 o'clock.
And that was right when the missile hit my airplane.
Oh, yeah. What do we got? Maybe back there, up there, come in. Trigger 3, ready position on Z. Okay, first you're still at your 9 o'clock. You're still right now, they're going down the deck. Okay. Okay, hear that line there?
So the MiGs came in, fired a missile, they left, and now we're kind of in a lot of confusion, you know, as we're trying to figure out what actually happened. Yes, sir.
What happens when the tail of your plane blows off?
Who's in that dynamics of flight class? What happens if you don't have the tail end of your airplane, your elevator and your rudder? Yeah, you're just a hunk of metal.
Oh, you just go.
So basically it was a easy rotation, rolling, just falling out of the sky. In fact, in one of the other flights, one of my classmates from the academy that I was in the squadron with got to see me get hit and just watched the airplane. He didn't know I was in the airplane until later, but he got to see the airplane just tumble. It goes to show how small the world it is. You know, here we are 10,000 miles away and we're with folks that we're in school with. We went along. But no, the airplane doesn't fly real well. All the warning lights came on saying I was on fire and that I had hydraulic leaks, you know, and electrical problems. So that's why we pulled the handle and ejected. Okay, so as we go. Sam White, the flight lead, made one more low pass to make sure we were okay. Had to go back and get gas. Had to go back and air refuel. And meanwhile, I'm in the parachute coming down. Okay? Now here's a schematic of the layout. You'll see the picture of North Vietnam. Here's North Vietnam. Hanoi over here, Phu Quien Airfield, Kep, and that's where the MiGs took off out of. These are the lines of our planned flight path. You'll see us coming in over here near Hai Phong. And the crash site was actually right here next to that lake. And that's the lake right there. You can see our flights coming in here. Cadillac is another F4 ship of F4s that was on a MiG cap, and they were chasing MiGs. And they were actually chasing 2 of the MiGs. And you can see MiG 1 and 2 take off out of Phu Quien, and they're coming up to intercept us. And then in a little bit, you'll see 2 more MiGs, MiG 3 and 4, take off out of Kep.
We didn't have radar ability to see them coming up.
That's correct. The radar is on a ship out here in the Gulf.
Okay.
And their call sign's Red Crown. You'll hear them talking on the tape. But yeah, they can't see that low. The radar wasn't that great. So a lot of this is happening that we know about today, but we don't know that when we're flying the airplane right now. So you can see the 2 MiGs checking. This is my flight here, trigger flight. That's the other escort flight, and those are the F4s dropping the chaff. And here's that Cadillac flight that's now chasing these guys.
Okay, activity turn right, anytime. Yeah, they're starting their turn. We're going to fluid tour around them. Okay.
And this is all going on at about 500-600 miles an hour. You see it, things are moving pretty quick.
033. Who are you off on? Okay, somebody on the roof, not squawking for. 043. Okay, great. I don't know, 8 miles. Flight 180 to the right. Come back to the right, come back to the right. Does you follow me? Here's 2 seconds. Figure to the right. Okay, 1 and 4, start your takeoff.
Big 1 and 2 are coming after us. Cadillac is now going to start chasing big 3 and 4, and that's that where you heard nice shot. Look at the picture of the missile leaving the airplane here. And about 5 seconds after the missile hitting this MiG, their missile hits my airplane.
Okay, you stand. Okay, don't be on fire. Okay, 1 mile, 15 miles.
There's the missile coming off the airplane, going against the MiG.
Okay, I got the 3 and 4 back to our building.
And that MiG right there, just you can see I disappear off the screen. And this is all animated. This was produced. This is not the actual radar picture. So now the flight is trying to get back together. They see the 2 chutes over the lake. There's 2 parachutes coming down, so they know we eject okay. All that's going on, but now my life just changed. I'm used to being with a big group. My backseater in the airplane, we're part of a 4-ship of airplanes, a bigger package, and we call that mutual support. We have all of our buddies that we rely on. Well, now all of a sudden I look up and the parachute's up there. First parachute jump I've ever made in my life. Anybody jump out of airplanes? Okay, smart, you know. But, and it all worked. Ejection seat worked, big boom. Backseater goes first, front seater goes, parachute opens. And I remember looking out at the ground and seeing all this black smoke come up, and that was where the airplane crashed. Because we ejected below the altitude that they recommend you leave an airplane. And we were also falling out of the sky. So we were lucky, we got out in time. And I had the feeling I wasn't falling. It was quiet, it was beautiful. North Vietnam is a gorgeous country, very green, jungle. But then I heard this zing, zing, and now there's folks shooting at me. And I went, whoa, I'm not used to this, you know, that. I'm used to being in an airplane. Yeah, they shoot at you, but you don't hear it, you know, you see it. And so I said, well, and I'm also seeing that I'm going to start getting ready to hit the ground, so I said, okay, well, I got to make the best parachute landing fall I can, and I didn't do a good job. Okay, I hit the ground and got all wrapped up in the shroud lines and whatnot. And I remember in training saying, hide. And I went, because that's what you hear all the time. So I said, okay, I got to go hide. So I started running as soon as I hit the ground. And after about 30 seconds, I went, whoa, it's hot, I'm sweating, and I'm out of breath. And I go, so I said, so the second thing they say is be calm. Okay, well, sure. You know, here you are all of a sudden in an environment you're not expecting. So I turn around and look, and I'm dragging all my gear. The big lifeboat, the survival kit, the parachute, it's all hitting the brush because it was high grass where I was on the side of a hill. And so I go, oh, so I finally disconnect everything. And then I had a bottle of frozen water in my pocket, so I drank that. And then I said, well, now I really got to hide. So I said, well, I want to get as far as I can. And so I crawled to get away from the crash site. In the meantime, I can hear the North Vietnamese hill people, because they weren't military, they were just basically hill people, hooting and hollering out there. Obviously, they knew something had just happened, and they were looking for me. So I went to a place, hid, took out my little radio. We had a handheld radio that we could talk to the flight on. It's on what they call guard frequency, which is an emergency frequency. So I turned it on and I started saying, this is trigger 4. Can anybody hear me? And nothing. Well, I knew that all the airplanes now had gone on either to the mission or had gone back to air refuel. And it takes about an hour to do all that. So I said, well, I got to hide for at least an hour because I really want to talk to these guys. I want them to know that I'm okay. My backseater I saw in the parachute came down, and we never heard from him. He was also captured and released later, but he never made contact. Yes, sir?
That's what
Okay, that's what you were going to ask. Yeah, what happened to him? Huh? Yeah, so he made it out okay, too. So I said, okay, so I put my radio away because I want to preserve the battery. I want to use it all up. And I sit and I wait. And probably about half an hour later, I hear airplanes coming back. hear the jet engines. I said, oh, it's my flight. So I pick up the radio and I start. There were two things you could do. You could talk on the radio, or you can hit a button that says, sends out a tone, and you listen to the tone. So as the airplanes got close enough, I hit the tone button. It alerted my flight that, oh, somebody's down there sending out this emergency signal. And then I talked on the radio, and they heard me. And again, he had the tape going, so he got to hear me say that I'm on the ground, I'm okay, but there's Gomers all around me. They were all trying to find me, and I'm trying to hide, that little hide-and-seek game. And they said, well, hide. And I said, I'm already doing that. Okay. But I said, I'm okay, and I was trigger 4 alpha, which meant I was in the front seat. Mel, my back seater, if he had been on the radio, would have said he's trigger 4 Bravo. And that's all part of that training we got, all that learning. Years of training that in about 2 minutes ended up in my predicament. So then they had to leave, and they did. They had to go back and air refuel again. So I knew about another hour before they'd come back. But now I could hear these voices getting closer. So now I had to make a decision on what I wanted to do when I met them. These were strangers that didn't like me. I had a .38 revolver with 6 bullets in it. And I went, okay, well, I can get 6 shots off. Okay, I can do that. But more importantly, I just don't want them to shoot me. I had made the decision I wanted to stay alive. I knew that I was probably going to be captured because I was a long way away from the coast, and there had never been a rescue that far up. And I was also very close to China. And China wasn't our friend at that time. I don't even know if they are now. So when they started getting pretty close, I laid down on all 4s and waited. And I could tell they saw me when they got quiet, because they were hooting and hollering. And then it just got quiet. And that meant, oops, they see me. And I could hear them walking up. And I said, okay, this is it. What am I going to do? And the first thing that happened was this arm got pulled out. And somebody took my watch. Okay? They wanted a little trinket. The second thing that happened was a little 6-year-old boy took my helmet and ran off with it. And so about then I say, okay, and I open my eyes and I look at him, and I swear that somebody was holding a musket. Again, hill people. Because it had a barrel, but at the end it had that wide mouth that comes out. And I went like this, like, I'm not going to do anything. And the third thing that happened was someone reached over and pulled my .38 out and fired the rounds into the air. So then it was, okay, what's going to happen now? So the guy had a big knife, and he came over and he started to cut my G-suit off. And I went like this, and I reached down and undid the zipper. Well, I don't think they'd ever seen a zipper. They looked at that, and then they wanted to play with it. Wow, up and down and whatnot. So we did that, took my G-suit off. They put a pole behind me, put my arms around it like this, and tied my elbows back, and that's how I stayed for the next number of hours. And they took my boots off. And I went, oh, this isn't going to be fun. Because I knew I had to do a lot of walking. There wasn't going to be a bus to pick me up, to take me out of the jungle. But then a guy in uniform showed up, and he kind of took charge. And the first thing he did was had him untie my arms, and he gave me my boots back. And I got to put my boots back on. And I said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I at least got to walk out of the jungle for about the next 6 hours with my boots on. Still had my arms tied around my back. And that was interesting because we walked through a number of villages, and as we went through, people came out on the side of the street, dirt road, and the younger kids were all pretty quiet. They were just kind of watching as we went along. The older folks were a little more irate, especially the older women. They seemed to be very, very upset over things. In fact, they would take switches and they'd come and hit the back of my legs as I'd go through. That was so that was my first indication that the local populace was not happy. So part of the guards' jobs were to keep me from getting hurt by them. because they obviously had probably lost one of the family members in the war or themselves, something happened to them, and they just weren't happy. And they took me to a cave near the town of Langson, and that's where they took my arms, pulled it up over a beam, didn't take me off the ground, but pulled me up so I couldn't maneuver very well. And they held me there for about 3 or 4 hours as they were getting ready for a press conference. So now I knew I had been captured. I knew that I probably wasn't going to get released. Along the trail, I thought a couple times of jumping off and trying to run from them. And then I thought back, I couldn't even run for 30 seconds. And these folks are in good shape, and they live here. So you know what? I'm just going to let them take me. And they took me in, and they put me in a big room where they had it set up for a press conference. They had cameras and whatnot. They had this saying on the wall, and today I don't know what that says. But what was important to me was to look right into the camera so that they could get a good picture of me, because if there was going to be anything released, I wanted Jane, my wife, to know that I was okay. Sarah hadn't been born yet, so Jane was, and my folks living back in New Hampshire. That, and then I also didn't have my wedding ring on because we took all of our jewelry off when we flew, but I kept doing this, and I wanted Jane to know that I was thinking about her, on my wedding finger. She never got to see that, but that's okay. I felt good about doing it.
And you were one of the other class, you were 24 years old.
Right,
So
yeah.
it's a couple years after college, guys.
So that happens pretty quick. You never know when you're going to be put into one of these situations where you just got to reach back all by yourself, because I didn't have any help here, and decide how you're going to act. You have guidelines, you have code of conduct, you have core values, principles that you hear about, character and whatnot. But again, the key here is all of a sudden you're here by yourself. Did the press conference. They took me out, handcuffed me, tied me to the back of a truck over on a railing, and that was the wildest ride. And Disney World had nothing to compare, as they took me to Hanoi, which was about a 6-hour truck ride in the middle of the night, bounced all over the place, blindfolded. They did take my blindfold off when we took the ferry across the Red River, got off, put the blindfold on, and then I got to walk into what was called Hualo Prison, and then I was set in a room, and that's where I spent the next 30 days. And that cell was in what was called Heartbreak Hotel, and had a small cell with 2 benches, and that's where we'd lay out our bed mat and sleep, and I spent the next 30 days in there by myself. Went to a number of interrogations where they asked me a lot of questions, wanted to know a lot of the military stuff, wanted to know a lot about my personal stuff, and that I shared. I gave them Jane's name, her address, her telephone number. I said, call her, let her know that I'm here, which they never did, and they didn't laugh. They didn't think that was cute. But when it got to a point where I had made my mind up that, I'm not going to tell you anymore, because one of the things in training was play with the folks a little bit, maybe tell them a little lie or embellish the truth a little bit, But when they got to a point where I wasn't willing to compromise the information, which was a turning point in my treatment, I do remember them coming up and a guard putting a pistol up to my head, and them saying, if you don't answer this question, then oh, by the way, we already know the answer, but we want to see if you have a good attitude, then we'll have to take some action. And that was the point where I said, well, that's it. Even though I wanted to live, I wanted to go see Jane, there was a point where my principles, I couldn't go any further. And I waited for about 30 seconds, and then they left the room. And the next day, they moved me into a larger room with 25 other Americans. So that was the end of my solitary confinement. And then I got to spend the next time with 25 other Americans. And I'll show you a picture of that here in a second. Meantime, I know what's happening to me, but
We actually had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
I was just curious, were you treated fairly during this time, or was it more harsh?
I guess it'd be the definition of fair. In their mind, Of course, we've been bombing them and making life miserable for them. They probably thought they were fair. My definition was it was harsh. I mean, they weren't my friends. I wasn't their friend. So basically, flying my multi-million-dollar airplane, delivering ordnance, and doing the mission changed to now, you know, my perspective on war fighting changed for the next 8 months. Now it was just me and them. So no, treatment was not good, food was not good, no communication, didn't get to, you know, have communication with my family. They couldn't had communication with me. And the conditions were pretty deplorable. We got sick. I never got tortured, but I was with folks that did to get information. I was lucky I wasn't, because I don't think I would have done well under torture. But I don't know, because I never was put in that situation. Yes, sir.
Did they give you the silver dollar with the pin in it? With the poison pin on it?
No.
Okay, you know about that though, right?
No.
I'm not. Oh, okay, never mind.
That's okay. No, there was no little pill to take or a poison dart or whatever. I did have friends that told me that if they were ever shot down, they were not going to eject. And some of them were, and they didn't. I didn't think that was the right thing to do, but that was their decision. You know, I wanted to get through this, even though it wasn't pleasant, so I could get back home. You know. So the car goes to Jane's house. She's in California, tries to find her, and then it's the blue staff car with the military officer, the chaplain, and they go and they hand her a letter, and in that it said, I was shot down, I'm missing in action. There was contact made with me, but my status is unknown. And they're here to help however they can. Meantime, my folks back in New Hampshire are just getting ready to go on vacation. And they're going to Hampton Beach, okay? And the car drives up, and my mom thinks it's a friend of mine. So she goes out and says, hey, yeah, it's over here, welcome, because they lived in a town that didn't have a lot of military. And he's got a somber face, and he lets them know that I was shot down, and my folks didn't know what to do. So they called the 800 number that they gave them, and they said, well, go on vacation. There's not a thing you can do. So they did. Next morning, my dad at the beach gets the Boston Globe, and this was on the front page, and it was pictures of 4 of us that the North Vietnamese had released. Now, I'm obviously over here, Mel, my backseater, Bud Breckner, and Larry Price, who were shot down the day after I was. And the North Vietnamese decided to release our names. So my status went from missing in action to prisoner of war. And that was good news for my family. They knew that I was captured. They weren't happy, but at least they knew I was alive. Well, in October, my status changed again because my name was not on a list of prisoners in North Vietnam. So from October to March, or actually January, Jane didn't know whether I was alive or dead. I was what they call a discrepancy case. I had been known to be alive at one time, but now they were not acknowledging I was there. Don't know why. That's just a game they played as we went through. Okay, so now, as we said, my life, I was in that room by myself, and then I got moved into the larger room at the Hanoi Hilton. And here's my group moving from one room to another. So our whole world lives in that little bedroll. Got a blanket, a towel, our sandals, a cup. And when we were in the courtyard, you could see there's our prison guard. We would just mingle. As someone asked in the last session, what'd you do all day? Well, we talked when we could, because we hadn't been able to talk for so long. Some folks were in solitary confinement for 4 or 5 years. So when they had an opportunity to talk, they wanted to talk. But here we are moving between rooms. As I said, my group here. And you'll see me here in a second as we're coming along. And I remember this, thinking there was a camera off to the side the day we did it, but I never really paid that much attention to it. Yeah, that's me right here. Kevin Chaney and Bill Talley and folks that I still see at reunions that we go to. Everybody's doing really well. There's our room in the camp. 25 of us lived in a room not very much bigger than put a wall up here. We did everything in that room, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're happy, we were sad, got sick. Went to the bathroom. I mean, everything was right there. We exercised a lot. In fact, in solitary confinement, that's what used up most of my time, was doing exercises. And then all of a sudden, on the 29th of January, 1973, they formed us up in the courtyard, which they never did, and they read us the peace treaty and said the war has come to an end, and you will be released in 4 releases over the next 60 days. And then they let us go, and we went back to our room. Well, we sort of believed it, and got excited, but yet we knew that this could have been a propaganda event. So we went back, and sure enough, for the next 2 weeks, things were just like we always had in the camp. Got our morning breakfast, but then we were fitted for what we called our go-home clothes, and you'll see when we come home what we were wearing. And we went into a room, made us take all of our clothes off, and then we stepped across, got our go-home clothes, put them on, and that's when they took us out to the bus for a release. And then we got to walk out the gate that we went in. For me, 8 months earlier, but for some folks, 8.5 years earlier that they spent there. Ev Alvarez was there for 8.5 years. And we got released in the order of our capture, in our shoot down. I was in the last group to be released because I was shot down late in the war. We walked out, got on a bus, and then the bus took us off. I remember our bus ride, we were one of the last groups out, and the populace was not happy. I mean, they would rock the bus, they'd stand in front where they couldn't drive, to where they had to just get forceful, and because they knew they had to get us to Guillaume Air Base for the release. Going across the Duma Bridge, which is a major bridge going across Red River. That was a target that a lot of us had dropped bombs on, and now we're going across it in a bus to go to the airport. And there's a C-141 landing, and on the 14th of February, the first release, we're still wondering if this is going to happen, and sure enough, the 141 made a low pass over our camp, and I was at a camp called the Zoo. And so we knew that, we think, this is really happening now. They marched us in, had a lot of paperwork to fill out, and a handover, an Air Force colonel sitting there waiting for us. Those are the North Vietnamese camp commanders that were, and then Ev Alvarez on the left there, 8.5 years, almost to the day after his shoot down, he got released. We met up with an escort officer that walked us out to the airplane. This 141 sitting on the ramp, the back doors are open, the outboard engines are running, so it was pretty loud. This is the first American I saw in the camp, in that cell. He was a Navy backseater, F4. Got to meet, say hi to him, Matt Masterson. Jack Inch, another Navy backseater. And this is me coming out. And then Mel Matsui, my backseater, came right after me. Got on the airplane, obviously pretty excited. We're pretty sure now we're going home. Got to hug all the flight nurses. I remember getting a cup of chocolate milk. It tasted so good. And then we taxied out, started up the outboard engines, and got airborne. And just about the gear coming up, people got pretty excited on the airplane. We flew to Clark Air Base in the Philippines. We spent 3 days getting uniforms fitted, a lot of medical examinations to be sure we were okay, a lot of, I call them interrogation debriefs on people we knew, names. One of my duties while I was in the camp was what we called to be a memory bank. And so I memorized a lot of information that I couldn't tell you today. But I knew it when we came out, and so I sat there and just rattled off all that information. By pulling all that together, we got a fairly good accounting on the names of everybody that was held in the camp, who was released, who wasn't released, who was seen at one point and not later. Those discrepancy cases we talked about. There were prisoners in Laos, there were prisoners in China, and through all those debriefings, we were able to get a pretty good listing of who was captured and then who was released as we went through. I got to make a 10-minute phone call with my wife, Jane, and I remember that, saying hello, and she says hello, and I said, how are you? And she said, fine, and she said, how are you? I said, fine, and then it was, got 9.5 more minutes here. So I remember talking about the MG we had. I bought her an MG, and when I left, one of the windows was cracked. And so I said, did you get the window fixed? And she said, what are you talking about? And that was an indication of how time had stopped. In my mind, that was a big deal. And that was 8 months prior. You can imagine the folks that were there 6, 7, 8 years, their kids had grown up. When we got captured, there had been almost a 4-year halt in the bombing of the North. There were no new prisoners coming in. So when we came in, we called them the old guys. We got to bring them up to speed on a lot of different stuff. We got to tell them that they totally missed the miniskirt era. Miniskirts had come and gone. That when they come home, their kids are going to have long hair and long sideburns. And of course, they wanted to know how all the teams were doing, all the football teams, baseball teams, and whatnot, because they basically were cut off with no information. And it's like time stood still. I remember sitting in the room calculating all the money I was making. And so when I came out, because I was getting paid every month, and I knew that money was going into an account, and it was making 10%, pretty good. So I had it down to a penny how much money I thought was going to be in the bank account until I talked to Jane. And we didn't have that much money. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, I lived. And totally lost perspective that life was going on while we were there. Now, we knew our life was going on, just like when you go to college, your parents are going to know what's going on back home, or you go off to whatever you're going to do. But they won't know what's going on. So communication, sharing with them. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm just telling her people's the memories full.
We have about 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yep. And that's that hand. No,
So,
you're the
how do
10
you-
minute one.
How do you feel about Vietnam now? Like, since you were put through that situation, how do you feel? Like, if you were to go back, what would you? How would you?
I was close when I was at Embry-Riddle, because I never got to tell you the rest of my career, but it ended up being in charge of the Air Force ROTC unit here at Embry-Riddle at the Prescott campus. And then I retired, and I stayed on 10 years as the Dean of Students out there. So that's why we're in Prescott. I didn't even know where Prescott was when we got assigned here. I had a chance to go to Hong Kong, and from there we could have gotten a flight over to Hanoi. And I decided not to go. I've got no interest in going back, although a lot of folks have. A lot of folks have been back and have met the person that has shot them down. I think they're a great nation. I think they're, living day to day just like we live day to day here. It appears it's doing okay, from the news I see and whatnot. No animosity against them as a nation. Maybe against a couple of the guards, but not against, against them per se. But no desire to go back. Some folks have. So, I hope they're doing well. I wish they were a democratic nation rather than a communist nation, but they got to live within, the bounds of what happened. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about the conflict itself? Like
The what?
the conflict, like
Overall?
yeah.
I think it was important to make a stand against the communist aggression and expansion. Was that the correct place to make the stand? I don't know. But if it was, then I think we should have been able to do the mission, just like we did over the Christmas of 1972, and all out go after the mission and take over the country, rather than have it turn out the way it did. Kind of like what we did in Iraq, and again, for the military standpoint, we were able to do the mission. We just didn't follow through. So, you know, I supported it, obviously. I got told to go, that was my job. I got to serve it in different types of situations, which I'm glad I did. That helped me grow up, helped me, you know, establish the values that I hold strong. And if I was asked to go again, I'd do it if that was my job. I don't fly fighters anymore. I can't. I mean, I got to fly the F-16, which was great, you know, but the airplanes are more for your age. You know, they're very powerful machines. So yeah, so I supported it, and I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was a mistake the way we fought it, and obviously after pulling out. Okay, so we got to come home. The C-141s came in to get us. Again, wonderful airplane. I left Clark in the Philippines and came into March Air Force Base in Riverside, California. And we're getting ready to get off the airplane. They announce our name, where we're from, when we're shot down and captured. And they said, you're going to have to make some comments. I went, oh boy. And I could not tell you what I said that day when I stepped to the microphone, because I was really looking over here. Now, there's Jane waiting for me. Okay, and I saw her, and they're holding her back, you know, and they said, no, you've got to say something first. So I said something, and then I got to come over and say hi. We talked on the phone, but that was it. And so then it was go through that process of getting reacclimated, re-Americanized. No, we were Americans. We used to being in the United States, the food and whatnot. We had to make a decision on what to do, and we decided to stay in the Air Force. We stayed in for a total of 30 years. And as I said, our last assignment was over here at Embry-Riddle. We traveled all around the world. My family moved 22 times. We spent 10 years in Europe. My last operational mission was over in northern Iraq in 2004. I was flying out of, I was assigned to Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, where I had Jane and my daughter there, Sarah. Sarah now is married, and with our grandson Luke, who's 8, and they live just north of Phoenix, down in Anthem, which is wonderful. And life's pretty good. We got to meet the Bravermans, okay, when we moved here, and I've talked a couple times out here. I've talked out with the university out of Embry-Riddle, and we're fully retired now and just enjoying it. Great. So that's the experience, and I share it with you to show how you never know what situation you're going to be put in. But when you are, you get to really fall back on what you are, how you've evolved, how you've matured, what you think is important, the training you've gotten. And then you're going to have to make a decision for whatever that issue is that you're facing. So pay attention during this training. Take every opportunity you can. Join clubs, go on trips, get exposed to as much experience as you can, because that's all going to be important for when it comes time for you to make a decision on how you're going to be. I used to tell the students out at Embry-Riddle, you have to think about how you want to be perceived, because you all know who you are. And your instructors all know you very, very well. But the day you go up and meet a stranger, that stranger is going to get an immediate impression of you. We used to call it when you go on your interview. You go to college, get a job, or whatever. Yeah, you'll have a resume, which is very important. One page that says a lot of stuff about you. But that moment you go up and meet somebody, whether you look them in the eye, whether you give them a good firm handshake, whether you say who you are, why you're where you are, I'm here to interview for an appointment to go to the Air Force Academy because that's my dream. And then you say why you want to go there. Rather than have the person that you're meeting go, well, who are you? Why are you here? Because in 30 seconds, in a 30-minute interview, that person who's going to make a decision about your future makes that decision. The other 29 and a half minutes is fluff. It really is, because that initial impression, how you look, how you come across, and that initial impression can't be just turned on and off by a switch, because you're gonna ooze it. It's just gonna come out of you, because it's what you are. So, think about that, think about your training, think about the experiences and the opportunities you have. But don't lose a lot of sleep over it, have fun. Okay? That's what high school and college and wherever you're going in the future is. And have a plan, dream about something, and start making that plan. It's not too early to apply for scholarships, ROTC scholarships, scholarships to colleges, getting an appointment to the academies. As you go along. So, thanks for your attentiveness. You're really a great class. Your eyeballs have been on me. Okay, very good. Little quiet, but that's okay too. A little reserved. After the briefing Colonel Peoples did, I wouldn't make any noise.
All right, everybody, give a round of applause, please.